So I get for drinking carbonated.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the next conversation that we're having as part of the Empowerthon fundraiser event. If you haven't heard about Empowerthon yet, it's the inaugural fundraiser for the Parent Tween Foundation. And the Parent Tween Foundation is the nonprofit charitable leg of the Parent Tween Connection. What's Parent Tween Connection? It's where it's where parents go when they don't know where to go. We connect parents to each other for moral support and also to the professionals who can help them help themselves and help their kids. So I am super excited to have one of our newest trusted experts with us. This is Dru Ahlborg. She is the executive director of the Bullying Recovery Resource Center, BRRC, and I actually got the two R's right this time. So Dru, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate you.
Gosh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Clarissa.
Absolutely. So, a couple of housekeeping tips before we actually get into the conversation with Dru today. We are broadcasting live to our Facebook group, our YouTube channel, and to our LinkedIn page. And we're going to be fielding questions from folks who are able to join us through our Facebook group. So, if you haven't joined us yet, come on over, search for Parent Tween Connection. I do have it open on the other monitor. So, if your request comes through, I can see it and I can bring you into the group. And today, we have Dru coming to chat with us about bullying, how to recognize it, how to recognize when it's bullying versus when it's conflict, and what we can do to stop it. And not just what can we do to stop it, but what we need to do to stop it. Mm-hmm. So, other piece of housekeeping, yes, this is a fundraiser for Parent Tween Foundation. So you're going to learn some good stuff here. And afterwards, there's going to be a shameless plug that says, I know you listeners just learned some good stuff from Dru. One of the ways that you can help launch the foundation is by giving even $5, $10 at the end using Dru's link. So stay tuned, make sure you get good information, which I know you're going to, and then we're going to have a shameless plug. So Dru, can you give us a little bit of the background about how Bullying Recovery Resource Center came into existence?
Absolutely. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Bullying Recovery Resource Center, which is a 501c3 located in Denver, Colorado. The short version is that when my son was in middle school, he was relentlessly bullied to the point where he was diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety, depression, and he tried to take his life. We ended up removing him from the school and filing a lawsuit. And I only mention that because I can't talk much about the lawsuit. I could tell you we settled it. But during that process, we learned so much about what bullying is, what it isn't, how parents need to act and react. Actually, they need to act more than react, I would say. So we went through some legal woes. Like I said, we ended up settling the lawsuit, and we found out a lot more about the bullying. What our son originally told us was about this much, and it was pretty horrific. But through depositions, we learned it was a whole lot worse, and it was daily, and it was pretty violent. So he moved on to a new school. We settled the lawsuit. We got him into some recovery with mental health as well as volunteer work. And I'll talk about that later if it comes up. But I think that helped him more than anything else. The good news, so let's fast forward like quite a few years. My son is in college. He's actually home, came home a couple of weeks ago. Yay. He found his people in his where he goes to college and is doing really well. I still see a little bit of the anxiety and PTSD, but he's done a lot of work. So there is recovery through this. And we'll talk about a little bit too, like how detrimental bullying can be on our kiddos. Mm-hmm. So that's the short version.
That's the short version. And the sad part is that you're not alone. You are not the only family to navigate this. I know, my husband and business partner's experiences. He dealt with some pretty awful stuff too. And the two of them are not alone. And so I'm thrilled that through the hell, if you will, right, that you found a silver lining, as it were, and you're now going and helping other families navigate the same process. So we hear so much about bullying, Dru, and cyberbullying, especially today with social media and technology being as ever present as it is. It used to be that in our day, back in the dark ages, right, that, we at least could leave school and presuming that home was a safe place, the bullying would stop for at least a little bit.
Correct.
And today that's not the case.
Right.
So let's start at the beginning. I know, we're talking about number one, what defines bullying? How do we
Mhm.
recognize it? And then that's probably going to tie right into how do you know when it's bullying versus when it's just two kids having a conflict?
Okay. I'm going to read the definition of bullying because I think it's real good. This is from Stopbullying.gov, and it says bullying is unwanted aggressive behavior among school-age children that involves a real or perceived power imbalance. Very important. The behavior is repeated or has the potential to be repeated over time. It includes, like I said, an imbalance of power, repetition, or it can be repeated, and includes actions such as making threats, spreading rumors, attacking somebody physically or verbally, or excluding people from a group on purpose. So the most important component of that, I think, is an imbalance of power, and it can be
Mm-hmm.
real or perceived. It's
Mm-hmm.
not always the big kid that's the bully. It can be the kid that's more popular at school. It can be the most intelligent child. It can
Mm-hmm.
be, it could be anything that differentiates them from possibly the person that they're targeting. Um,
Mm-hmm.
my son's case, it was several children that were bullying him. So that was the imbalance of power, as well as my son was very small at that age. So
Mm-hmm.
that was there again, that the imbalance of power. And it has, so the bully will exploit that imbalance of power. So they'll use it against the target.
Got it. And I like the fact that it clarifies, like, so often we think of bullying as um, physical
Mhm.
impact, but you indicated in there that there's a reference. I don't remember precisely what it was, but there was a reference to verbal
Yes,
in
verbal,
there.
and there's something called relational bullying, which is more, it's like shunning, or the best example I can give, my son he went through all types of bullying. He really wasn't cyberbullied, believe it or not, but he was physically bullied, verbally bullied, but relationally bullied. The best example was he would sit down at a table and the kids would get up and leave. And that harmed him more than getting physically harmed.
Mhm.
And you see that a lot with girls. There's a lot of gossip, shunning, rumor spreading, things like that. And that's that relational bullying. And it's as detrimental as any other type of bullying. It's harder to watch. It's harder to find. It's harder to identify if you're an administrator or a teacher.
Mhm. Right. All right. So that's the definition. What markers do we look for to recognize it beyond the textbook definition from stopbullying.gov?
So so we're going to talk about imbalance of power again,
Yep.
the intent to harm. And I'm going to cover that here in a little bit too when we talk about conflict versus bullying.
Sure.
Threat of further aggression.
Okay.
And if bullying escalates and does not get stopped, it leads to terror.
Mhm.
Those, unfortunately, are the families that we help all the time. The child no longer wants to go to school. It's terrifying to
Mhm.
be in a place that is not safe for them. Um, but that intent to harm, there's we're seeing a lot, especially in the Colorado schools, where they want to place everything. They say everything is conflict. And conflict is normal, it's natural, it's necessary. Everybody has conflict.
Sure.
So, for example, I know your husband is a huge hockey fan, and so am I,
Mhm.
and I think we like the same team. But just say that Joe might be a Detroit Red Wings fan, and I am a diehard Colorado Avalanche fan. And we might have a conflict about that. We might discuss the players. We might even get heated and very passionate. But as soon as I look at his face and I know that I've crossed that line, there's an intent to harm. So if it's conflict, I'm going to back off and say, Joe, we're going to agree to disagree. You're wrong. I'm right. But um,
But I'm
but
not going to like
that's
bust your nose
conflict.
over it.
Yes. But if I see that look, or that something that happened to Joe, that, like, what, I've gone too far and I keep pushing it, that
Mhm.
goes into bullying. And I'm intending to harm him. I'm intending to make him feel really poorly. Um, But conflict, we all have conflict, and conflict can be handled usually by the kids,
Sure.
or it can be coached with, a trusted adult. With
Mhm.
bullying, it's different. It has to be stopped. It can't be coached. The kids
Mhm.
can't shake hands and go their separate ways. It'd
Right.
be like asking, if I was assaulted, to shake hands with the person that assaulted me and, like, yeah,
Right.
it's all good, kumbaya. It's not. It
Mhm.
needs to be stopped.
Absolutely. So then how do we see this? Because like you said, like even your kiddo, even throughout the entire process of your depositions and the lawsuit and the investigations and everything, right? Even your kiddo didn't divulge to you the full extent.
Mhm.
And there's an array of reasons that that could happen,
Right.
why that could happen. I know I've talked to a number of people who've navigated this process and they're like, well, I didn't think anybody really had my back.
Mhm.
Or perhaps, yeah, there's bullying happens at home too between
Yes.
siblings. It's not just a school-based situation. So if it's
Right.
bullying or abuse at home and they feel like, well, I don't really have anywhere safe to go, right? There's all kinds of reasons that they don't divulge. What do we look for to recognize, because when we know that they're not necessarily going to tell us everything, because some of this brings up shame for themselves about not being able to protect themselves or stand up, or again, a number of reasons. But what do we look for so that we even know it's a thing?
And you're absolutely right. There's so much shame involved. Um, if you think about it, a child's job is to go to school and be successful. And that can be
Mhm.
academics, that can be sports, and that can be social life. And if one or all those are falling apart, they
Mhm.
don't feel successful. So that's where the shame comes in. But any change in behavior or action from the child, and I know we're talking about teens and tweens, and there's a lot of that anyways.
There is, right?
However, looking for unexplained bruises and cuts, personal items that might be damaged with no explanation, a child who decides that they don't want to hang out with their friends anymore, or maybe wants to quit that thing that they've loved for years. It could be change in grades. The grades could go down. They don't want
Mhm.
to go to school.
Mhm.
Unexplained headaches, stomach aches, those ambiguous, and those can be real, believe it or not.
Sure, but they don't necessarily end up having a physical cause. It's a very much an emotional
Emotional.
cause. Like
Mhm.
anxiety can absolutely manifest as
Absolutely.
headaches or like migraines or ocular migraines or stomach aches or whatnot.
Right, right. So any changes, and it's important as parents, if we feel like something's going on, to address it, to ask them. And
Mhm.
we talk to our parents about, like, you try not to react, but listen, truly listen. Like, shut the computer, put the phone away, turn it off, turn off the TV, and just listen.
Right.
And tell them together you're going to come up with a solution, and they did nothing wrong, and you're
Mhm.
together you're going to go through this.
Well, and I think that's another cause for the shame is that
Mhm.
some kids, oh, you've got really big ears, right? But and they're taunted about their big ears or their big nose or that they're itty bitty or like for me, I was vegetarian when vegetarian wasn't cool. And so I wouldn't say that I got bullied, but kids definitely made fun of me for it because it was different. Like whatever that different thing is, right?
Mhm.
That if they, depending on how they receive that judgment, they're going to go, well, it's my fault that I'm getting taunted and I deserve it potentially,
Right, right.
which is a whole other ball of wax and mental fitness, mental wellness circumstance. But so when we see these changes, what do we do?
Well, first of all, you listen to the child, try to get as
Right.
much information as possible, and we tell parents to report every bullying instance, every single one. Every time the child comes in and said, I was called these names, I was, followed into the bathroom and this happened," whatever it might be. And we recommend you do it via email, because there's always a paper trail. If it is
So it's
reported
documented.
verbally, yeah, it's documented. If you report it verbally, you follow up with an email. "Hey, we talked about my son yesterday and I told you XYZ and you said you would do A, B, and C. Is that correct?"
Mhm.
It's always, we always have that way to track, like, there's a timeline.
So so when we're documenting, if we go back to that definition of bullying where it's the imbalance of power and it's the intent to harm,
Mhm.
my instinct is that when we're documenting this, it needs to be not just a who, what, where, when situation, but what was said. And if it was like, I'm going to get you, or, you better watch out where there's a threat of harm, like those are the types of things that we need to be documenting, right?
Absolutely.
What
Absolutely.
else? Is it just like as much detail as possible? Do we need to go finding witnesses,
And
that
actually,
kind of thing?
that's the school's job. They're supposed to investigate. And I
Okay.
can speak to Colorado. Colorado, we have a law. It's Jack and Kate's law that says when bullying is reported, the school is required to investigate for an imbalance of power, which you and I now both know that
Right.
that's one of the definitions of bullying. If there's not an imbalance of power, it might be conflict. Um, and we found a lot of schools don't want to call anything bullying. They don't want to investigate.
Sure.
Yeah. So there's some, we have my son was moved to a different school after he was bullied, and the school administrator at the new school, we asked him if bullying happened here. And he said, "You're not going to like my answer." Of course it does. It happens in every school. He said, "Now my job as an administrator is to investigate every time it's reported." And he said, "It's never fun. It's never easy. It's like
Right.
picking up a rock in nature and finding the moss and the dirt and the worms, and you want to put it back down and walk away." He said, "But as a job, as my position is, I have to look at it and I have to figure it out to the best of my ability." And that's the truth. Even the best schools out there that have the best academics, that might have a culture of kindness, there's still going to be bullying.
Mhm.
Um, they might have less, they might handle it much better, but there is, it's, you see it everywhere. You can't turn on the TV these days without seeing bullying in the workplace, in our government, in our schools, obviously in church. It's
Yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah. All right. So document every circumstance with as much detail as possible.
Mhm.
I also imagine if there's text messaging going on and, bullying, cyberbullying,
Yes.
that we need to take screenshots and
Yep,
have
absolutely.
documentation,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
So we document it. We document. I mean,
Mhm.
that's a business conversation
Yeah.
too, right?
Right.
Then what? So it's a school's obligation, at least here in Colorado by law. And I imagine there's something similar in many states, if not all. I don't know. I mean, that's your world, but at least here in Colorado, what does it mean that they have to investigate? Because that for me seems kind of nebulous at the moment.
Right, yeah, they're supposed to, they're supposed to do their own investigation, they're supposed to talk to witnesses, if there are cameras, they should pull the film, that kind of thing. Talk to not only the child said, "I'm being bullied," but talk to the children that have been accused of doing the tormenting, any witnesses that might be involved, the teacher, things like that.
Okay.
Meet with school. There we go. Sometimes the
Okay.
schools will put together called a safety plan.
Okay.
So they'll create something where the child can be safe in the school, like maybe both the kids aren't in the hallway at the same time. They use different parts of the playground, things like that. Can work sometimes, sometimes it does not. There's no easy answer, unfortunately. But it needs to be taken care of.
Right.
Sometimes a child being expelled is the proper thing.
Right.
If the child wants to rectify and make things different, then there's an opportunity possibly for restorative justice, where
Okay.
they can do something either for the school or for the child that they harmed to make things whole again and move on.
At what point is there a time frame within which the schools need to complete this investigation?
I don't think there's anything in our law that says it has to be within a certain time frame. And as of right now, so I told you about this law, this Jack and Kate's law. If the school doesn't do it, there's really no repercussions for the school. That's where we have to kind of take off and keep moving forward. And a lot of states are doing different things to change the laws and make them more effective for the
Sure.
child.
Sure.
But yeah, we've got a long way to go, and everybody everywhere does.
Well, absolutely. And so I know you went through the process of actually filing a lawsuit, and I know you can't speak to details on your end. I know you're not the only person in my world who has navigated that process.
Mhm.
And I think from my experience of chatting with families, there's kind of two extremes of like, I don't want to make a bigger deal out of this than it is. And
Mhm.
then there's put them up, you're not going to mess with my kid.
Right.
Right. And neither one is right, neither one is wrong in
Mhm.
every case. But at what point do you find that most families get to a point of saying, okay, we're pulling in an attorney or an advocate, or like, some of the support that you and your husband offer? Do you find that families wait too long? Do you find that it's better to speak with an education specific attorney sooner? What would you advise families in that realm?
Boy, that's a really, really good question. I think it all depends on the circumstances. I talked with a family recently that was telling me about their son, actually, it was a grandson being bullied. I said, "Well, when did you report it?" And, "Oh, I haven't reported it yet." And I said, "Well, the school can't do anything unless you report it." So, um, and then we have, it all depends. There's some children that have been bullied for years and it's been
Mhm.
reported for years. And if it's not going any well, if the school's not trying to protect that child, I would highly recommend additional resources, either us, we do work with some educational attorneys in state, and we can recommend. Sometimes it's if the child has a disability, or is on, has ASD, something can be written into the IEP or even the 504 to help them, to put them in a situation where they're less likely to be bullied. And that can,
Mhm.
so we work with IEP experts too. And it's bullying, sometimes it goes into that harassment category because there is,
For sure.
there are different religion or might be female or a gender difference or things like that. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of components that go into this.
Sure.
But it's no child, and I say this all the time, no child ever deserves to be bullied, ever.
Mm-mm. Agreed. Well, and I think a lot of families are dissuaded from seeking legal counsel because
Mhm.
there's a significant cost involved,
Absolutely.
right?
Agreed.
So, I'm a single mom, or even if I'm in a co-parenting situation and the funds just aren't there, I want to help my kid. That's where, something, a resource like you guys comes
Mhm.
in,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Um, what do you say to those families?
Well, I mean, as an organization, we can do things up to a level that a lawyer could. So we can actually take some steps. I don't want to say it's towards legal action, but towards holding the school accountable, um, that we do not charge our parents for.
Okay.
We do, like I say, work with attorneys, and sometimes BRC will help fund if an attorney needs to get involved, to help stop the bullying. If there needs to be, we've had a couple restraining orders placed on children where
Mhm.
like that was like nothing else was working.
Right.
Sometimes the solution is the child needs to go to a different school.
Right.
Sometimes it's homeschooling. Sometimes it's a different district, and it depends on the family too.
Mhm.
But part of the reason we decided to do this is because of those single moms that like, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. My
Right.
child's being bullied. I don't know what to do. We can help them. We're not going to charge them. We're going to help them understand what bullying is, what it isn't, what the school is required to do, what they can do to help their kiddo move
Mhm.
through this and get into a
Mhm.
safe spot.
So document, document, document,
Mhm.
report.
Yeah.
My guess is that it's probably better, even if you're not sure that it was bullying, maybe you don't know that there's really an express, like a clear imbalance of power, or there's not a clear threat to safety or like intent to harm, but you're like, wait a second, this could escalate. My instinct is it's probably better to document that on the earlier side,
Yeah.
maybe when it is still kind of nebulous, so that in the event it does escalate, we can at least show a pattern. Yes.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay.
And, like we discussed before, most children, I would say that, the families we've worked with, I tell them that what that child has experienced sometimes comes out in eyedropperfuls. It's just a little bit at a time.
Right.
Um,
Right.
there's because like we both talked about, there's a lot of shame
Mhm.
and their fear of retaliation too. A lot of
Oh,
children won't ever
absolutely.
report it because they're
Mhm.
afraid of being retaliated against, and that's why sometimes bystanders don't do anything because they're afraid the bully's gonna shift
Oh,
their
absolutely. I mean, I can totally remember. I was that kid that I wasn't the one that was the target, but I was one wrong move away from being the target,
yeah.
and I look back at it now. I didn't have the strength at the time to stand up for the kids that were getting bullied. And I didn't necessarily outwardly acknowledge that I was their friend, but I was, at least I tried to be, but I had to protect myself. Like self-preservation definitely came in from my perspective at that time, because
Right.
I mean, unless it was like overt and like, somebody was about to get punched, that's something I felt confident stepping in on. But I knew that I was the tall, gangly kid that was already made fun of, that was like right there. It could have gone the other way, from some of the cool kids, so to speak.
Right.
And I didn't necessarily know what to do at the time.
Right.
So, You mentioned bystanders, but I've also heard you use the term upstanders.
Yes. So that's, we talk a lot about upstanders. And so I'm going to read you the definition of that too, the dictionary definition. It's a person who speaks or acts in support of an individual, particularly someone who intervenes on behalf of a person being attacked or bullied.
Mhm.
Just your example, you sometimes watched and were like, oh, I don't want to get involved. But there's
Yeah.
other ways to be an upstander too. And that could be going up to the child that was attacked later and saying, I saw what happened. I'm so sorry. Do you want to go report it together? Do you want to come sit with me at lunch? That stuff, any upstander type behavior can save lives.
Yes, it can.
Um, there's a wonderful statistic out there that says even if a child at least has even one good friend,
Mhm.
the chances of them suffering to have extreme mental health issues goes down.
Mhm.
It just takes one of us to stand up. And we're
Mhm.
not all the kid or the person that can get in the middle and say, stop it. I see what
Right.
you're doing. Stop it. That's
Right.
scary.
Right.
Um, but we can be the person that goes later and goes, I know what's going on. My son actually had an upstander. We had no idea because he went and reported everything to the school officials as well. It wasn't, we were in the news, and that's kind of how we decided to start the charity too. And after the news story came out, this child contacted my son and said, I reported to the school. Like I took my mom and reported it and they did nothing. And so, but that act, even afterwards, my son's like, my God, someone was on my side. I'm not crazy.
Mhm.
Someone believed me. Someone saw what I was going through.
So then if there's one thing to be like, okay, what do we do if our kid is the one that's getting bullied, if
Mhm,
our kid's on the receiving end?
mhm,
But you just also gave insight of like, if your kid is the observer,
mhm.
and maybe they're the person that I was, right? Where they're like, they're afraid of being one step away of being the
Right.
next target,
Mhm.
right? And we say, okay, maybe you're not the kiddo who's going to go be like, stop, 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 separate, but going and reporting it, I'm thinking I need to follow up as the adult in this situation and be like, hey, is the school following up? Or like reach out to the parent of the kid who's on the receiving end of the situation. Like if that student's parent had reached out to you and said, hey, Dru, my kiddo just made this report about what he observed your child experiencing. I want you to know about it so that you can follow up with it. Like that probably would have been supremely
That would
helpful
have
for
been great if we found out at the time. And we didn't, and I'm not sure why, but later we did get to know the parent pretty well, and obviously the child too. The
sure.
boys kind of connected as well, after both kids were out of that school too. But
Mhm.
um
Well,
yeah,
because I mean, obviously suicide prevention is a big mission of Joe's and mine,
yeah,
and recognizing that one person, one advocate, one like, dude, that sucks. I'm sorry. I at least reported it so that like you're not going to be the one that went and tattled. And maybe that's why they didn't reference it. Maybe that kiddo didn't even tell his parents, right? Because he was afraid of getting the reputation of being the tattletale. Because again, that's going to make you a potential target yourself
right.
if they find out that you were the one who blew the horn. Um, but at least saying that, like, I want families to hear, like, hey, if you hear this is going on, go report it to the school. It doesn't just have to come from the victim. I never even necessarily thought about that,
Hmm.
right? But
Right,
for us as other adults, like being able to go into the school and saying, look, I saw this happening after school on school property, for example, if we saw something,
right, right.
right? Makes a difference. And then teaching our kids to be the upstanders, to be like, hey, do something, even if it's just come talk to the parent so that the parent can then talk to
Absolutely.
the school.
Hmm.
That saves lives.
Right, right, absolutely. And the best way to do that is model it, right? If your kid sees
Exactly.
you out taking care of people and being kind and compassionate and, standing up to injustice, whatever capacity that you as an adult can, the
Mhm.
child can learn those behaviors too. The other, and it's a double-edged sword. There is something, it's in Colorado, it's called Safe to Tell, but most states have
Mhm.
something like that
Right.
where a child can anonymously make some kind of
Make the call.
report.
Right.
Um, and I know one of my kids has used that for a couple of things, but it
Mhm.
also gets a lot of false reports happen on
Sure.
Tell too. So it's this double-edged sword.
Well, And I
But
actually know somebody who's in security in one of our local school districts. And,
mhm,
when I see her at social gatherings, she talks about like they are obligated to follow up on them.
mhm. Yep,
And sometimes they do have to wade through the false reports, but it's something that, at least in her school district, it's something that they are taking seriously and following up on
that's
to
good.
some extent anyway.
They have to investigate as so yeah,
Right.
that's good. Yeah.
So you've given us some insight of what to do if your child is the one on the receiving end of the bullying behavior. You've given us some insight for families, um, if they're the ones who are the observers. And I actually want to reference to a conversation I just had with Elizabeth Stitt a little bit earlier today, talking about empowering our kids as leaders. One
Mhm.
of the things that she was talking about, one of her favorite questions to have families ask their kids is, "What is your plan for whatever the situation is?" And I think this is a really good conversation to have with our kids about, like, hey, how do what do you see happening in school? And if you saw, create scenario up, like make scenario up to have a conversation with
Uh-huh.
them, what would your plan be? What are some actions that you could take? Because they don't necessarily know what to do in the moment. And oftentimes in that moment of verbal assault, like we can kind of freeze and we don't know what action to take. But having that forethought, what could your plan be, helps our kids learn to be upstanders.
Right, right,
What insight do you have for the folks who nobody ever wants to be in this situation, but they're the kids, the bully, their kids, the bully?
right. Um, well, those kids need intervention and care as well. And
Hmm.
I think you and I've talked in the past that bullying is a learned behavior, and we talked a little bit about, you brought it up earlier in this talk, that some of these kids that are bullies are bullied at home, right?
Hmm.
Whether it could be a sibling, it could be a parent, that type of thing. Um, and statistically, those kids that are bullied and then become bullies are more likely to have a litany of mental health issues than
Hmm.
even the bully or the one that has one or the other roles versus both. Um, but it's important that if you're told that your child is participating this behavior, that you talk to them. You can see how you can help them. You can talk if you can help them see what kind of harm this could do to another person.
Hmm.
Um, empathy it should be taught in our schools. It should be part of our social emotional learning, but it has to
Hmm.
happen at home too.
It totally
What do you
does.
think happens when you call somebody else's names? What do you think
Hmm.
they feel like, to have those kind of conversations?
Hmm.
Sometimes they need some mental health help, and that's fine too. Maybe a sporting activity where they can get outlet those emotions in a different way.
Hmm.
But those kids need an intervention too, and they need the care as well as all our kids.
Hmm.
Being a target, we call them bullying targets versus victims, just to for more empowerment.
I was
Yeah.
going to say it's a more empowering term. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm,
Well, and one of the things that comes up for me, I've heard from, so many other parent coaches who say the behavior is a symptom.
mhm,
It's a form of communication. And so if we do hear that that's what our kiddo is, the behavior that our kiddo is participating in, look at it and go, okay, what's the underlying situation? What's the need that isn't being met? Or what's the circumstance underneath? It doesn't make them a bad person,
no.
but they need help because they're causing harm.
Mhm,
And frankly, not only to them, to the others, but in some fashions to themselves as well.
absolutely. Yeah, my guess is a child that participates in bullying activity is not a happy child. There's something going on. Like you
Sure.
said, some kind of need not being met, or some kinda something internally, and,
Mhm.
it's important to help that child figure that
Sure.
out and work through it.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. We've covered a lot of ground in a very short time. And I know that you're going to be back. Our trusted experts are on almost all of our events and our podcast and such. So this is the shameless plug for folks listening. And a thank you to Dru, um, for anyone listening, the link to donate to the Parent Tween Foundation is in the descriptions of in all the places where we're broadcasting. And we have a little bit of a friendly contest going on among our speakers for Empower-a-thon to encourage them to help share the word about all of the conversations that we're having. We have thrown out a temptation to them, or an incentive to them, if you will, that whoever helps us raise the most money individually, we will take 20% of their donations generated and donate them to a cause of their choice that helps teens, tweens, and families. And I'm sure it comes as zero shock to our listeners that you chose, Dru, for should you be the fundraisingist, as we're calling it, that the 20% of those donations are going to go right back to the Bullying Recovery Resource Center.
Yeah, I think so. We're growing so much. We need the funding. So yes.
Absolutely. Well, and I know I see the work that you're doing. I hear the conversations, with you and your husband, and especially him I know he does a lot of the actual advocacy while you're kind of like the face of the nation, as am I at Parent Tween, right? We've got the guys doing some of the real hard work and the important work in the background as we're out talking to folks about it. And you're doing such good work that I'm thrilled to have you in the Trust Expert Network, and I'm glad to have you here today. And we've got kids and families to impact. So thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you so much. What an honor to be here. I really appreciate it, Clarissa. And I love the work that you and Joe are doing. You're helping not only parents, but obviously the kids. But sure. I love that you formed the foundation where you can help bridge that gap for especially these families. We were just talking about maybe that single mom that just can't afford to get the help that she needs for her kiddos. So
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.